or good mornings. Depend on wherever you are in this planet. So I am Fitri Amir. I will be your chairperson tonight, and today we will discuss a report actually in this webinar. It is called I don't know why the name of this report is Long Food Movement, but that is the title, long food movement transforming food system by 2045. That will be in the next 25 years. So it is actually it's a long time in the future. So I will be in my 60s. So today we will have Chee Ling from Third World Network that will make some welcome remarks and introductions. Then we have Pat Mooney from IPES-Food. He will presenting the key messages on this report, the Long Food Movement report, and Ching from Third World Network will discuss some of the key issues for the regions, and after that we will have reflections, comments from the national groups. We have Dr. Nurul Abdul Latif from Forum Kelautan Makanan. Hello, Dr. Nurul. Yeah, can you open your...
Hi everyone.
Yeah, hello, yeah.
Hi.
And we will also have Mr. Udin from Aliansi Petani Indonesia. Hello. Yeah. And lastly, we'll have Xin Song from Farmers Seeds Network, China. Hello, Xin Song.
Hello, Amir.
All right. Without any delay, I would like to invite Miss Chee Ling to give some welcome remarks.
Thank you very much, Amir. It's so good to be joining you from Malaysia. My name is Yoke Ling, and I'm the Executive Director of Third World Network. It's an honor and a pleasure for us all to be coming together today to really listen to the speakers on the panel, introduce us to a very important report. This report, as Amir said, the long food movement is about how we can transform the options and the challenge for us to transform the food systems for our planet and our people and peoples by the year 2045. This very important effort of the International Panel of Experts on Food Systems, IPES, and the ETC group that has for many years, led by Pat Mooney before he retired, leading an organization that is a very important blueprint for us as civil society, the challenge of tracking technology, corporate concentration, and what it means for the people and the planet. So this report challenges us with two scenarios. If we do nothing and it's business as usual, in this case, agribusiness, and the new term that I think it's a new term introduced in this report, the biodigital industry, where you combine, in a way, the most reductionist form of looking at nature, reducing nature to DNA, to sequence information, to its barest parts, so that we can turn it into a commodity to make money. So the reduction of biodiversity and nature into commodity and sellable commercial parts. Combine that with the digital force of the digital industry, introducing artificial intelligence, introducing drones in agriculture, that we in the civil society fighting for ecology and society have long recognized that fixing problems, especially complex problems with so-called technology solutions, is not the way. And we probably see in our lifetime now, techno fixes taken to an even more extreme form. Therefore, this report challenges us to look at these two scenarios. Do we want to move towards, without changing the way nature and seeds and people become commodities? If we don't challenge, we're going to get into more and more of a world with not just corporate capture and corporate takeover, it'd be really corporatizing the planet and its peoples. But the challenge to us is that we can reject that vision and have the true vision by 2045, and we will listen to Pat tell us why 2045. The concept of a long food movement is really having a long-term understanding, and as the report says, with a very horizon scanning. In other words, we scan the horizon. I'm sitting actually by the sea right now. When we look at the horizon and we see how the sky meets the water and the planet really encaptures that. Horizon scanning is to be able to see broadly, to see the complexities, but not to be overwhelmed, so that we can then actually act. And I think the challenge of this report is for us to act. And we really do need to act. We need to actually have, and we know that food systems and staying alive and with dignity and health in this world is about recognizing in the area of agriculture and food production, the need to respect diversity, biodiversity, and the exciting science of agroecology, and to understand that all these are related to human rights within a governance structure that has to be about justice, about equity, and equity within our generation, and equity also towards our future generations. And that is the combination of what the report calls the ingredients and the pathways for us to get to 2045. And we have to do that because right now in 2022, even before COVID-19, we already saw the movement of so much power in our world in corporations, right? Agribusiness, pharmaceutical, the digital platforms that's supposed to liberate human beings and make us independent, but actually it's a new form of slavery, the way it is playing out. So when we see that already happening before COVID, and we now see with COVID, all the weaknesses and flaws of those systems which have been thrown up. Global supply chains overnight became lockdowns. Farmers who were growing food could not export if the farm products were linked to the global chain of supply and trade. And in many countries, the imports of food, they suddenly found themselves will rise so high, it becomes, COVID is not ending. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay.
If the connection gets bad, I will turn off your camera. Yeah, but it's okay for now.
Okay, so maybe I will just turn on my camera anyway. Yeah. Okay. So I just want to end by saying that we are living on the edge now of a new crisis. Not new, it's another cycle, because within this next few weeks, more than 100 countries in the developing world, including some of the poorest countries, and also some so-called middle-income countries, will begin to have to pay new levels of interest for debt. Now, debt has been accumulating for years now in many of our countries in different ways, but the COVID pandemic in the last 2 years have resulted in a lot of borrowing by governments to deal with the pandemic, to deal with creating emergency social safety nets, to buy food. And in this whole scenario, new debt of a lot of money has been actually, we have not seen so much debt collected, so accumulated so quickly in the last few decades, and pay up time is coming. And in the government's debts around the world, most of the debt is shifting more and more to be borrowing from the private creditors, from the what we call the capital market. And there is no mercy when it comes to the private lenders. And so we find ourselves facing very, very close maybe looming, We find that getting the kind of support, the good subsidies, and in the pandemic and its economic crisis, they have been even more marginalized. So it is a long food movement because what we want to do is long-term, because it's fundamental transformation. It will not be easy, and this report can give us some directions that accumulates wisdom of many, many thinkers, scientists, and also civil society, and our farmers, and fisherfolk, and indigenous peoples. So thank you once again for joining us today, and for this very important report to contribute to that journey that will make 2045 the world that it should be. Thank you.
Thank you, Chee Ling, for the welcoming remarks. That's actually pretty much a summary from on what we will discuss today, tonight. And I would like to invite Mr. Pat Mooney from International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food System, so we can look deeper into the report. And without further delay, I welcome Mr. Pat Mooney. Yeah, please unmute. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, all right.
Okay, good.
Sorry.
Thank you very much for having me. And I must say, I really appreciated Yoke Ling's comments now, because that was a really excellent overview of the purpose of the report and some of its findings as well. And I also want to thank Ching for helping put this together, and all of you for joining at this time. When we started to work on the report, it was really 3 years ago now, and it was 2019. It was before COVID-19 had appeared, and we felt at that time that civil society was doing well in the food movement. There is a food movement out there. There are food movements doing things all over the world, and much is happening, and much of it is very exciting. But what seemed to be missing to us was a sense of the future, of what was coming, or what could be coming, not just what might happen to us, but what we could do to down the road to plan better for the future ourselves. And I think that's been borne out by our experience of the last 2 or 3 years, that not that there's unpredictable crises in a sense, but in fact, there are predictable crises that we can expect in our future, that there will be obviously the drama and tragedies of climate change, biodiversity loss, and the complications of that, which are vast. We will also experience other economic crises. These things come together. They run in packs. You don't just have one kind of crisis that doesn't affect others. We can expect other pandemics over the decades ahead, even perhaps within a few years. So these kinds of crises will come. And the question for us had been, in looking at a long food movement, was, so how can we prepare for those things, if that's remotely possible? What tools do we need to prepare for them? Do we have the capacity in civil society to really map our own futures in a way that we take charge, rather than simply being under attack all the time? I think all of us in our work in civil society are used to simply fighting fires, one fire after another, one crisis after another, one problem compounded upon another problem. And it's extraordinarily hard for us to really look ahead. And when we began to talk about a long food movement, people immediately talked about what they wanted in the future, what they would like, what they would see as being a great food system in the year 2045, rather than looking at how would we get there. And it's a very different thing, because whether you talk with people in Latin America or Asia or Africa or my country, Canada, or in Europe, we tended to have a very similar vision of the kind of food system we would like to see. It was filled with agroecology, with the theme of food sovereignty. It was very strong for everybody. The idea of local markets, strengthening local markets, local production, the end of multinational corporate control of the food system. All those kinds of ideas were common for everybody. The end of hunger, of course, and malnutrition and overnutrition, which is a major problem as well. But we didn't have clear plans about, again, how to get there and what would be the impediments on the way to getting there. How could we avoid those crises or overcome those crises that will affect us along the way? We picked the year 2045, and that's a sign perhaps of our naivety then, because we saw the Sustainable Development Goals running to the year 2030. After the Millennial Development Goals, which ended in 2015, we thought there'll be another round after 2030, which will go to 2045. So it seemed to us in sort of so-called development terms that there was some logic to thinking of the year 2045 as a target for when certain changes could take place. I think now we're all aware that that's one of many possible targets along the way, and the challenges of climate change and biodiversity loss and so on are overwhelm any theoretical United Nations goals of some kind at any point along the way. Our assumption again was that civil society is good at many things, very good at fighting fires, very good at coming together rapidly in crises to work together to overcome things, but not, again, capable usually or thinking seriously about what we would like to see happen more than a year or two down the road, not 5 years, not 10 years, and certainly not 25 years. And to suggest that we could think 25 years ahead, when our chair today will be in his 60s and I will be very close to 100 at that time, is that just delusional to think that we can plan that way? And as we started to develop the report, feeling in some ways that maybe we were being delusional, I think we all concluded, those of us working on it, and there were probably 40 people or so really involved in this process, that it was possible. Not in detail, we can't describe the future in any precise kinds of ways of what will happen, but we can prepare for it in many ways that we haven't in the past. And the key term that came out, I think, for me and several others on this proposal, in this report, was the idea of gray swans. That, again, we know about black swans, those things that come out of the blue, that suddenly strike us, that we have no ability to plan for. But there are also, again, gray swans that we can, in a sense, predict. We don't know their dimensions entirely. We can't exactly plan their schedule. Their arrival and departure times aren't clear. But again, we can predict that there will be climate crises, pandemics, economic crises, food crises that will happen and will come together. And can we then put some things in place now that will get us to a safer place in the future? So that was the goal initially, that looking at the long term, we quickly then, and looking at the long term, realized that the food system itself, the food movement itself, can't be by itself. We absolutely have to be working with other movements. That it's just not possible for us, even though we see the food system as critical to all of us and a common ground for everybody. We need to be talking to the other movements out there, those who are working on trade issues, those who are working on finance issues, as TWN is, those working on climate, those who are working on biodiversity, in those specific spheres, those who are approaching the crises in humanity from a human rights perspective. All of those kinds of backgrounds, those looking from labor perspectives, indigenous peoples with a very wide vision of the world as well, beyond food. We need to be talking to each other in ways we haven't in the past, looking for experiences that others have had that we might be able to apply to the food system, looking for how we build out our vision of the future and our concerns about the future to be in dialogue with other movements that have shared interests with us and can help us plan together. So the long food movement quickly became also a wide food movement. Looking at that horizon scanning that Yoke Ling was talking about on the beach, that's critical for us, as well as seeing ahead, but seeing around us very carefully. What else is going on that we don't normally take into account, don't normally consider as we plan for next steps in the food system of something that we want to have. So those were two elements that were there. The third element of our concerns was to realize that it's not just what we want or what we want to plan for, it is also what is being planned for us. And Yoke Ling described that as what is agribusiness going to do to us in the decades ahead? What is their thinking? What do they expect to have happen? The bio-digital revolution that they're talking about, will they succeed in that? What will its implications be for communities, for peasants, for fisher folk, for hunters and gatherers, for pastoralists? How will they be treated in this system that's being planned by agribusiness? And agribusiness, of course, being backed by asset management companies, the biggest sort of financial institutions in the world, in the private sector. What's their strategy, and how do we counter that strategy while we work toward our own strategy? So we developed two scenarios, basically. The first scenario was looking at what agribusiness will do to us, agribusiness as usual. And I think that much of that you already are probably familiar with. You have this sense already of the digital transformations that are taking place that Yoke Ling mentioned again. That a world full of artificial intelligence, of drones, of farm machinery with all kinds of sensors on the ground that can actually plant and harvest and monitor everything that is happening. Supply chains that we're being told will actually become better for us, and that will actually help us to have more local markets. And I'm amazed by the conversations I've been in with industry, where they talk about how their ability to access information, local information, and to provide information to local producers will enable stronger local supply chains, local markets, where in fact, what they're really doing is developing a system of control of information, of monitoring of all of our activities that will extend the supply chain and add an additional layer of complexity to the supply chain, which we will not control at all, which will mean that the information will be in a cloud somewhere, and that cloud exists in reality in Iceland or in Quebec, where I live in Canada, or it will live in Norway or Sweden, but it will not live locally on the ground. We'll depend upon that distant cloud for our information. We'll depend upon satellite systems and fiber optic cable systems, which can fall apart, can break, and they do all of the time, literally every few hours, somewhere in the world. That we will not control again. We'll find ourselves dependent upon what others choose to tell us about our own production conditions and our own markets, not what we know ourselves or can share among ourselves. So in fact, the strategies of this new digital age of information control in terms of food production really mean surrendering what we have already and have lost so much of already to others who will make the decisions for us and claim that they are trying to help us in our local development. And again, we know how badly that supply chain has worked. We've had, we say we're going to depend upon computer systems and information systems that are controlled by the companies. Last year, or actually in 2020, not in 2021, in 2020, we had more than 65,000 cyber break-ins in corporations and governments around the world, more than 65,000, and causing enormous damage, taking over enormous amounts of information, breaking into every sort of highly protected system of information that exists, and it keeps on going. So can we really trust that to be in the service of peasant production, of food sovereignty around the world? That's highly unlikely. We're compounding that view of the world, the corporate view of the world in the future, the digital view, with, again, biodigital information. The idea that now we don't need to be concerned about genetically modified organisms, living modified organisms, genetic engineering of organisms. We really now are moving into a world where the technology is one that will manipulate the existing organisms, which will allow us to edit the DNA of wheat or rice or barley or cassava or livestock, and to the interests and needs of and profit of the major corporations. So a non-transgenic strategy for the manipulation of the DNA of species that will serve the interests, again, of the biggest companies. And the corporations are moving into that digital DNA world that, again, gives them greater control than ever before of what can happen in the future, what they want to have happen in the future. So we see the movements of industry saying that they're going to support food security and are welcoming even agroecology, they say. But they're doing it with them actually exercising more control over all aspects of life and information systems. To all of that, we have to add a third factor, which we didn't take into account when we began the long food movement research, which is that industry and some governments have actually factored in already the crises ahead. They already are assuming that the world will not respond well to climate change, that 1.5 degree centigrade increase in temperature is not just inevitable, but it's naive, that they would believe that we're much closer to being 2 degrees or higher in the future by the year 2100. And they're assuming that already, and they're assuming from that the kind of crises that will arise that will not be controlled in a way that they would necessarily like, but will happen. So they're assuming that the climate crises will take place, that there will be mass migration, that there will be crises in hunger in the world, and almost uncontrollable hunger, and they have to plan for that. So they've built in what we've discovered with the pandemic, which is that in a crisis, the rich take care of themselves, and they don't really do anything more than pay lip service to the crises facing the poor in the world. So that's there now. And any thought that what they're building is in terms of a food system for the future is going to be for the world, I think is naive. They are thinking now, planning for, assuming that the world in the future will be one which is divided very sharply between rich and poor, those in the temperate zones and the rest of the world, and they will take care of the temperate zones that they feel they can manage. So that is also part of the equation that we have to be assuming. Now, against that gloomy image, we have to think of, well, what can we be doing? What's possible for us in the food system, and reaching out and talking with and working with our allies in other movements. And a lot is there. A lot can be happening there, and a lot is going on. We are seeing remarkable efforts by our movements, social movements, indigenous peoples organizations in the world to work together to build new forms of collaboration. And that keeps on going, and we think can strengthen. We looked at, in the end, we could have looked at hundreds of possible scenarios. We actually, within that scenario of what could happen, we tried really hard to be absolutely realistic, not to be naive about thinking by the year 2045, we will have nirvana. It will be great. By the year 2045, there will be no hunger. By the year 2045, we will have nothing but local markets. We assume that we're in a struggle, we'll keep on going, we'll win and we'll lose, but what really can be done? And we looked at, again, 4 sort of pathways that in this scenario that we thought we could at least begin to explore together. One pathway was, again, looking at how do we build agroecology and how do we strengthen local or territorial markets? What can be done there realistically? Can we collectively, globally, locally, nationally, regionally, take initiatives which will, over 25 years of time, make it more possible for us to create those systems. I'll come back to describe that a bit more. The second area we looked at and we're building out from now, in fact, is looking at how do we respond to a food emergency, a future crisis, knowing they will happen. Can we put in place now model laws that can operate can be applied, perhaps adapted for local conditions in different parts of the world? Can we put in place crises model laws again at the national level that protect local markets and local security for food? And at the global level, are there legislative proposals that we could develop here, regulatory proposals we could develop here, treaties that we could now formulate in at least broad strokes that we could introduce and look for an opportunity in the years ahead to actually get on the table and get into negotiations that could give us greater food security in a time of food crisis. Thirdly, we also looked at strategies around corporate concentration and how can we counter corporate concentration. How can we try to break up industry? What sort of proposals could exist for the global south to fight against the controls of the north? Are there legal tools that are possible, regulatory procedures that are possible that can help us break up that system over time and look for opportunities where the corporations overreach themselves, and in that overreach expose themselves to opportunities that wouldn't exist normally. What are those tools we might have for us? We also looked at ourselves as social movements and civil society, and our relationship with our own resources, our funders. How do we restructure our relationship with those who are providing financial resources to us now, whether they're some bilateral aid agencies or foundations or other social systems that are backing us, cooperative movements and so on, that we can change that structural relationship to allow us to plan for the long term. Instead of having us work on small projects over short periods of time, can we work with allies to change that so that we have more resources to work for longer periods of time, more flexibly than in the past? Is that realistic, or is that just being naive? In each of those areas, as we looked at the opportunities that were there, we saw really quite exciting possibilities. We saw ways we could shift large amounts of resources in, I think, quite dramatic ways over a 25-year time frame. We looked at the structures of the international institutions as well, and we examined, in the case of the food system at the global level, we looked most closely at the Rome-based agencies, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, the World Food Program, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, all headquartered in Rome, all United Nations bodies. And we looked also at the Consultative Group on International Agricultural Research, SAGAR, the big agricultural research institutions that are outside of the UN system and very much dominated by the Gates Foundation and the private sector these days, and by the US government and the UK government, but which have strategies as well. How can we deal with those systems to create better structures that help us in our work, or stop some of them from working at all if we find them working against us, as I would argue is the case for the CGIR. So those are the areas we explored. We looked at them in a 25-year timeline. We concluded, if I can just summarize, maybe ask the chair to remind me of the time so I don't speak beyond my 20 minutes. I must be getting awfully close now. Do I have a couple of more minutes? Hello?
You can make your closing now. Yeah.
Okay, I'll bring this to a close. Just to give me if you just give me 1 or 2 more minutes here. So our conclusion was that it is practically, politically, realistically possible for us to see that by the year 2045, we could take the $8 trillion food retail system in the world and move $4 trillion, more than $4 trillion out of that system to a better place, to a system which really supports agroecology. We could reduce the environmental damages, the climate damages of the food system, the industrial food system, by perhaps even as much as 75% or higher over the next 25 years. So huge relief to greenhouse gas emissions and so on because of that. We felt we could move from a highly concentrated agribusiness to a decentralized food system, not entirely, but very significantly that way, so that the big corporations of today, the Nestle's and the Cargills and the Bayers and the Sinochems of the world, can be broken up and not have the power and influence that they have today, that those are realistically possible, and that we can change our structural relationships with governments and with the United Nations system. We actually mapped out a 9-point strategy for restructuring the Rome-based agencies that we thought is viable over a period of time and was financially possible for us to manage as civil society. So we created a series of areas here where we thought we can really strengthen territorial markets. We can create new legal structures at the local level and at the international level, model laws that we can move into place when the political opportunity arises that can make the world a better place. We can move money around by using different systems of taxation, removing some of the subsidies, the $18 trillion in subsidies that go to the private sector in the world. And over time, erode those at least to give us more resources and opportunities for ourselves. So in the end, we were optimistic. We are optimistic that we have within us the strength and resources of civil society to plan ahead, to really take the steps that can build one upon the other, going backwards and forwards at times, losing sometimes, gaining at other times, that can position us to really make major changes in our planet, and that we can also, recognizing the strategies of the biodigital revolution being planned by the private sector, we can in fact counter those strategies. We see their weaknesses now as we're all alarmed by the privacy invasion of the big companies, the Alibabas and the Amazons and Apples of the world, and how that's created alarm around the planet. We can take that and use that alarm and expand that to then the world's concerns about food systems. So let me, I'm a little worried about my time here, so let me just leave it at that stage. I can certainly say more and add more, but I really am anxious to hear what you have to say and your thoughts about this, and I can provide more information as is appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pat Mooney. It is actually motivating, but at the same time, it's troubling description when we think about what if business as usual will continue. But I think all the participants here will not let that happen. So I think this report is very important for us to read and digest, so that we can act accordingly. And I think since the Green Revolutions, what you have said has been done slowly, beginning from the West, and now they are looking at other countries, especially in Southeast Asia, in Africa. You know, the thinking now, whatever the business, the agribusiness thing, the agribusiness promote is good. So when I came to farmers and I said modernization is not good, so they will say you reject modernization. What do you expect? Do you want me to still using buffalo? So that's the thinking now. So now in Malaysia, there are a lot of issues on land consolidation. They want to form estates. Instead of what you said, decentralized, they want to centralize everything. So I think now maybe we should hear from Ching from Third World Network. Maybe she has some key issues for this region that she want to discuss with us. The floor is yours.
Okay, terima kasih Amir. Thank you. Good evening, selamat petang, 晚上好 to everyone. It's a pleasure to have participants from the different countries here, and we hope we can have a good dialogue at the end of the session too. Well, I just wanted to just provide some reflections that builds on the ideas that are set out in the report, and really to think about, what are some of the key areas for our region, and that as we as civil society, as farmers organizations, can try to address. Now, the Long Food Movement report makes it very clear that our food systems and the peoples and the healthy environments that are their foundation are in trouble, really, if we don't do something about it. So the question for us is really, what kind of future do we want, and how do we want to get there? The first point I wanted to make that struck me about the report is that all the pathways that Pat eloquently described is that they really are about system change. And this is exactly what is needed, because we can't play around or try to change things in small ways, but we do really need a paradigm shift, and a real paradigm shift towards agroecology. I think this is a priority for our region because the Green Revolution has already wreaked havoc on an environment and people's health. We have lived this reality. Many of the farmers have suffered, their health has suffered, and our environment has suffered. But we know that agroecology, which is identified in the report as one of the key opportunities for change, is really about transformative systems change. And we know from evidence, and the evidence is increasingly recognized internationally as well, that agroecology is actually the most robust, holistic, and appropriate response to ensuring sustained productivity while protecting biodiversity, stabilizing the climate, providing healthy food and nutrition and diets, and basically ensuring system resilience. And as part of that, it is really the small farmers, the peasant farmers, the fisher folk, indigenous people, and women who are the ones who have contributed immensely. With their diverse and resilient farmer seed systems and indigenous food systems. And we know this in the region also because there are examples of success. In Malaysia, the work of Sahabat Alam Malaysia, my colleagues are here, with indigenous communities, for example, and with fisher folk, has helped these communities face the ravages and the challenges of climate change. So we really need to step out our advocacy efforts to push our governments to support agroecology in the region. And this has to be over a whole range of interventions, covering policy, technical support, financial resources, research and extension, education and awareness. And there are efforts in the region we know of, for example, working with higher education centers and research and extension. We have our examples from our colleagues in China, the Farmer Seed Network, who have been working on participatory plant breeding with farmers and really making a change in terms of the kind of research that supports agroecology. And I hope we'll hear more from them later in the session. Having said that, there's still many threats, and these threats are often driven by corporations and elites, which have resulted in the violation of rights. So my second point is that we can't advance agroecology in this region if we don't at the same time ensure that the rights of those who are at the forefront of the struggle and their rights over resources such as land, water, and seeds are protected. Yeah. So now this can, there are, of course, the international standards and norms as contained in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and other people working in rural areas, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, we have ILO conventions, and also very importantly, farmers' rights in the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture. But here is where we also need to be aware of the pressure from developed countries on developing countries to join UPOF 1991, including through the Intellectual Property Chapter of Free Trade Agreements, with severe implications for farmers' rights to freely use, safe exchange, and sell farm-safe seeds. And in our region, the East Asia PVP Forum is playing a very major role in pushing countries to join UPOF 1991. And we really need to join together to fight this. This is a regional effort which has been chaired largely by Japan, but also with complicity from our own governments, unilaterally wanting to accede and to join UPOF 1991. So I think this is an important area to flag because it could really threaten our farmers and their rights to farm safe seeds, right? Third, I want to pick up on a point that Pat mentioned in regard to agroecology supporting circular and solidarity economies. Now we know that these reconnect producers and consumers, and that territorial markets, farmers markets, short supply chains can enhance access to fresh, diverse, and nutritious food. And agroecology actually provides the space for these different local trade and marketing systems to empower and allow small-scale and peasant farmers, indigenous peoples, women, rural and urban communities to flourish. And we've seen, of course, as Yoke Ling mentioned in her opening remarks, how during the pandemic, the long global supply chains failed. And we also saw many examples of communities coming together and providing food and short-circuiting these long supply chains and building a community-supported agriculture. I believe our colleagues from China will be sharing some of their experience in this regard, and we look forward to building on those experiences and learning from them so that we can actually catalyze how we identify the challenges and ways to overcome that, and how to also support and facilitate these local food systems. We know that government can play a role in providing funding, for example, and infrastructure, but that also public procurement from domestic agroecological or small farmers can be a policy tool to guarantee markets for those producers. At the same time, there are also threats because, for example, in some of the free trade agreements that our governments are negotiating, government procurement chapters, state-owned enterprises chapters may actually stop these efforts. Which brings me to my final point, and that's, I think, a theme that has been repeated already, that I'm repeating, that Pat and both Yoke Ling and Pat have mentioned. We really need to confront the corporate power that continues to drive the advance of industrial agriculture in our region. There are incentives. Pat mentioned the subsidies, right? The harmful subsidies that allow the continuation of agribusiness as usual. Subsidies for chemical agriculture, for example. These have to stop. There has to be regulation of corporations and their actions, and we need mechanisms by which corporations can be held to account, especially at the national level. At the same time, Yoke Ling also mentioned the structural issues that we need to address. Trade policy, for example, plays a part, because issues like investor-state dispute settlement, which are included in FTAs such as the CPTPP, the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which some of our countries are either members of or keen to join. And we also have this in bilateral investment treaties, which actually give corporations the upper hand over the public sector, over regulation, and over our lives. Okay, so many of our groups in the region have been fighting these FTAs. And this has necessitated, of course, what Pat talked about, that collaboration cross-sectorally, joining up with trade justice movements, activists that work on access to medicines, for example, those promoting workers' rights, debt cancellation, and others. So actually, there are many areas of work ahead of us, but by collaborating and building on our strengths in the region and learning from each other, we can go a long way. I'm glad that the speakers to follow will be sharing some of their experiences, really in how they have taken back control of our food systems and are building the transformation we need from the ground up. Because that's where change has to happen, and that's where change will come from. So I'm really looking forward to the discussions to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ching's, yeah, UPOF 91s, trade agreements, monopoly on the supply chains, monopoly on the subsidy schemes, GMO lobbies, and so on. It has always been the challenges in these regions, and I think it's as well as in other countries. So we really need to work together to face these challenges, and we have tonight with us tonight Dr. Nurul from Malaysia, and also Mr. Muhammad Nuruddin from Indonesia, and Xin Song from China. So maybe we should hear from them their experiences, and maybe what we can do together. I mean, what is the strategic priority that we should focus, and also the main question is how us from different countries can manage ourselves to face these challenges. So I would like to invite Nurul Salmi. The floor is yours.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear me? I hope I can be excused from using the video because my internet isn't very good. It might falter and get shut down if I put it up too long. So if I'll just say hi to everyone, and I have to switch the video off in a little while. Okay, so we got a lot of input just now from Pat, Mooney, Yoke, Ling, and Ching, and I think the vibe, the thoughts are running through everyone's mind right now would be, I think, similar in many ways, yeah. And okay, before I proceed, I'll just switch off my video. It's already known that the agro-industrial, as we've been discussing from the very beginning, how agro-industrial food system, business as usual, continue to negatively impact our environment, our natural resources, and so on. Loss of biodiversity and habitats, not only on the terrestrial but also marine environment. And it has been a known fact. It is a known fact that the global food system, the agro-industrial system, is failing. The business as usual model is not working. In other words, the current food system is unsustainable. What we need to be able to produce is a wide variety of healthy, nutritious, available food without or having very minimal impact on the environment. So what we need is actually a sustainable food system. And everyone has been speaking about agroecology this evening, and this is the growing movement that we see emerging in the past several decades that is offering innovative alternatives to the problems that we have at the moment. And it is garnering increasing support and acceptance within our food production system. So this is very, very clear. And the reason I think that industrial agriculture cannot meet the world's need is that the structural forces driving it is or are misaligned with nature, or how nature works, including human nature, resulting in the sustainable outcomes that we see today. On the other hand, with agroecology, which works and aligns with nature, promises to be a sustainable solution. So that is a very clear distinction between the two. So this is there is a very clear action that which way we should be taking, which path we should be taking moving forward. And a lot of I think a lot of different perspectives ask if agroecological farming can feed the world. There has been studies in the past that have shown that ecologically attuned farming could increase crop yields by an average of almost 8%, and that organic farming could support current human population and expected increases without expanding farmland. So there is quite a few studies going around in different parts of the world that is giving us evidence on this. For countries that depend on rice as their favorite food, such as Malaysia, just give you an example of the systems of rice intensification, or SRI. This is an example of an agroecological method in rice farming that should be encouraged and promoted by the Malaysian government, and maybe in other countries as well. The SRI method has demonstrated that farmers can increase their harvest yield to almost double, from conventional farming, while reducing water usage by up to 50%. So in Malaysia, SRI has been implemented since 2015, 16, 2014, but with very limited success because there hasn't been enough or sufficient government support. For example, in Malaysia, right now, up till 2018, the data that I've got, only 3 organically certified rice farms that we have in the whole of Malaysia. And this makes up only about 118.446 hectares of an area. Saying that there is other organic rice farms which have not been certified, because certification is expensive, and a lot of these farms are small farms. But those that have been certified by the ministry, there's only like 3 farms in the whole of Malaysia. And one example of this farm is the Lovely Rice Farm, which was formed in 2010, and that was the earliest that was certified. And up till many years afterwards, there wasn't any other that has been certified. Sri Lovely has garnered a reputation as an example of an agroecological rice farm in Malaysia, and has conducted numerous trainings for many groups inside and outside of the country. But up till now, there's still very little that has moved forward in terms of how we want SRI to move, rice production to move in Malaysia. That is why Malaysia is still having problems with rice production, as our SSL is still very low, and this is one area where the Malaysian government should increase its effort in promoting, developing, and expanding not only on organic SRI rice farming practices to increase rice production in Malaysia, but also organic farming methods. We are still importing a lot of our rice, more than 50% from other countries. And like what was being shared earlier, there are many other outstanding agroecological practices with different crops that have been implemented and proved successful in other countries across the globe, Africa, South America, China. So Malaysia can learn lessons and obtain shared information from these countries to promote agroecological practices more in Malaysia. And if we take a look at the Malaysian organic food industry, it is still very small, with more than 60% of our natural food being imported. So, and consumer spending on organic food is still lower than conventional food products. So it is believed that by increasing the demand for organic food, better food sustainability can be achieved through transformation of the food value chain. And if you look at what happened during or since COVID-19 pandemic, more of the public have been found to shift to healthier diets. I think that is that can be found happening in many countries, and there has been an increase in the purchases of organic food. So there can be, campaigns or programs or initiatives that can promote organic food and healthy food to the public. And then another aspect is that despite the excellent agricultural conditions in Malaysia, the proportion of land used for organic production is relatively low currently compared to conventional farming. Which, if you look at the organic production or land use, it covers only about 0.1% of total agricultural land. So we have a long way to go. So that's very, very low. We have other forms of agroecological practices such as permaculture, agroforestry, or integrated field forest grazing system in Malaysia, and they have very high potential to be developed as high performance ecosystems that could produce a significantly higher amount of output per hectare there is a growing number of such small groups of farmers in different parts of Malaysia. But better coordination must be in place to make this more visible and effective. And then another aspect is that in Malaysia, research on organic farming is not yet being promoted to an intensity that would meet its potential. Presently, agricultural research fund flow into research fields related to organic farming in Malaysia is negligible. That means there is a lot of untapped potential there. And if you look at, of course, agroecological practices, there are so many other benefits that have already been shared by all our earlier speakers, so I'm not going to repeat on that. But one very interesting aspect that you can see that came out from COVID-19, for example, in 2020, amid the movement control order in Borneo, Sabah, a partnership formed among communities to revitalize SRI method in rice production, almost in 50 acres of village land. So the communities got together, and now they're planting 22 delicious traditional varieties of rice sourced from their own and other villages in their vicinity. The local rice they produce were able to sustain the villages and could earn over 5 times the floor price in Malaysia. So this is a good example where better farming methods can be developed via continual learning, where farmers also discover the value of collaborative working relationships, sharing seed varieties and experiences of what works and what does not for practices. And these relationships encourage further experimentation for ongoing improvement and increase their knowledge, improve their interactions and understanding of the farm environment. An important aspect of their partnership was the establishment of their community seed banks and promotion of seed exchange. So this is a very good example of grassroots initiative. So the Sabah example also demonstrated how farmers collaborate beyond their fields as well, such as in launching their marketing and processing of their rice harvest. That way they could keep more of the financial returns in their own hands. And I think investments and improvements like this are very much needed, because in turn it could help the rural-urban migration and improve youth employment once the ecological farming increase the crop yields and lead to improved food security, so that we can help the rural-urban migration in that way. And then another is going beyond such localized collaboration. Agroecological farmers are also building a global movement, and this is what we want with the long food movement. We want to have that collaboration. We want to have that global scale movement where farmers are empowered, societies are empowered in that way. So this approach can put those who produce, distribute, and consume food, rather than markets and corporations, at the heart of the food system and policies, and defends the interest and inclusion of the next generation.
Thank you.
But yeah, have my time finished?
Yeah, you can conclude now. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Okay. So the uptake of agroecological practices has not been widely adopted by farmers yet. This can be traced back to various reasons: the lack of enabling institutional and policy environment, governance, integrated legal frameworks, and so on. Like Pat Mooney mentioned earlier, the most important question is how to get there. We have all of these that we can identify all of these factors, but how do we get there? I think that the challenges, the hurdles that you spoke of just now, I think those are important for us to discuss and identify at localized scale. At the end of the day, when we speak about agroecological practices and looking at the issue at hand, we need to look at this in a system thinking manner. It has to be an integrated, holistic manner. And what was mentioned earlier about working with other movements, not just looking at farming or agricultural groups, but also working with other cross-disciplinary groups in trade, climate, biodiversity, human rights, etc. So those, taking those up, in a system thinking manner, will allow us to better understand and forecast the outcome of the initiatives that we want to go ahead with the long food movement. I think I will stop there for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Terima kasih, Dr. Nurul, Salmi. There is a very informative comment from Malaysia. Dan sekarang saya jemput Bapak Nurudin. I would like to invite Bapak Nurudin. Dia ada presentation ya. Silakan tanpa membuang masa lagi.
Iya, terima kasih. I'm apologies. I'm speak in bahasa. Saya menggunakan bahasa Indonesia. Ini merupakan pembelajaran dari organisasi tani, bagaimana organisasi Aliansi Petani Indonesia ini mengembangkan konsepsi praktek tentang kedaulatan pangan dan agroekologi. Lanjut. Ini gambar dari sebaran peta di mana organisasi kami berada. Kami ada di 14 provinsi, ada di 70 kota kabupaten, berada di 5.000 desa, di mana total anggota kami itu ada 194.450 rumah tangga petani. Kami basisnya adalah rumah tangga. Jadi kalau kita lihat peta Indonesia itu, kalau kita bicara kawasan pangan itu, kita membicarakan juga tentang desa. Jumlah desa di Indonesia itu ada 79.910 desa, di mana ada 4 kategori desa, ada desa pangan, desa sawah, ada desa pesisir, ada desa perkebunan, dan ada desa kehutanan. API mayoritas berada di desa sawah, desa kehutanan, dan desa perkebunan. Lanjut. Bisa di next, lanjut. Ini komoditas utama yang dikembangkan oleh API. Kalau bicara tentang pendekatan pertanian agroekologi, kami di Jambi sudah mengembangkan sustainable kelapa sawit lestari, termasuk juga kayu manis organik yang juga ekspor ke beberapa negara Eropa dibantu oleh off-taker. Kemudian ada kopi, dan juga di Jawa Barat kami mengembangkan beras organik, tidak hibrida, itu inbrida dari varietas lokal Indonesia punya, terutama di Sintanur, bukan Sintanur, mentik dan beras Cianjur. Di Jawa Tengah kami juga mengembangkan beras organik. Jadi di 14 provinsi ini berbagai macam varietas komoditas yang kami kembangkan. Anda bisa lihat komoditas yang diusahakan oleh anggota-anggota API yang semuanya itu sudah pendekatannya melalui Agri-Co-op atau koperasi pertanian. Next. Next. Kami akan menjelaskan next gambar utuh dari sistem pangan yang ada di Indonesia, karena 17 juta petani sawah yang mayoritas itu kepemilikan lahannya 1/4 hektar, dengan angkatan kerja berada di wilayah padi itu hampir mencapai 29 juta orang yang bekerja di mata rantai perdagangan beras. Kita akan membicarakan sistem pangan, terutama beras itu. Kita lihat bagaimana sistem di budidayanya, kemudian di subsistem perdagangan dan distribusinya, kemudian kita akan lihat subsistem di konsumsinya, sekaligus juga akan kita melihat isu-isu yang ada di subsistem cadangan pangannya. Lanjut. Next. Next. Sampai gambar utuh. Next. 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 Ini merupakan persoalan isu-isu sosial ekonomi untuk konteks beras yang ada di Indonesia. Jadi kalau Bapak Ibu sekalian bisa melihat di aspek produksi, distribusi, dan konsumsi, kalau kita lihat di aspek budidaya, itu ada isu-isu strategis, isu-isu kritis, terutama di penguasaan lahan, itu konversi lahan pertanian di Indonesia itu rata-rata 600.000 hektar setiap tahunnya. Karena perubahan iklim, maka kita lihat bahwa banyak gagal panen sawah-sawah puso dikarenakan banjir dan kekeringan. Karena perubahan iklim, mitigasi belum baik, maka serangan hama penyakit itu menyerang dan rendahnya panen yang ada di lahan persawahan. Demikian juga di input sarana produksi, kita lihat konteks benih, kemudian konteks pupuk, kemudian alat mesin pertanian, agri mesin tools itu kita lihat semakin mahal dan terbatas. Petani kecil itu susah mengakses di sarana produksi pertanian atau input produksi. Kita lihat juga ada soal di distribusi. Kalau kita lihat penggilingan padi dan pengudangan, itu pada pasca panen itu banyak kehilangan kualitasnya di pengolahan pasca panen, termasuk juga rendahnya harga baik gabah maupun beras, yang itu kemudian menyebabkan tingkat keuntungan petani itu rendah. Kalau kita lihat konteks di konsumsi, di warna hitam itu kita lihat masih ada beberapa terbesar dari petani yang juga produsennya juga seharus konsumen juga kekurangan pangan, kemudian juga akses juga terbatas, kemudian rendahnya kualitas, kemudian tidak cukup dalam pemenuhan gizi dan pangan sehingga muncul yang namanya stunting. Untuk konteks Indonesia, isu stunting itu menjadi prioritas penanganan dari pemerintah Indonesia. Sehingga dengan daerah yang kepulauan itu ada daerah-daerah yang memang surplus pangan, ada daerah-daerah yang memang tidak menghasilkan beras itu dengan keterbatasan akses maupun infrastruktur, sehingga suplai dari daerah lain itu menyebabkan kenapa harga pangan itu menjadi mahal itu. Bukan karena pangan itu tidak ada, tapi karena memang akses dan sarana dan prasarana, terutama infrastruktur itu masih sulit dijangkau. Lanjut. Next. 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 Ini akan saya menjelaskan kalau ada agrarian question, itu juga ada food question gitu. Ini soal di negara berkembang ini, untuk soal aspek budidaya, isu-isu di lahan pertanian atau hak atas tanah maupun air, itu berapa banyak ya lahan yang dibutuhkan. Kita tahu bahwa di Indonesia itu luasan panen itu dari 12 juta hektar itu menyusut menjadi 10 juta hektar karena yaitu tadi konversi lahan pertanian yang meningkat secara drastis. Kemudian isu kritisnya lagi, berapa banyak kebutuhan dari pupuk dan benih yang dibutuhkan. aksesnya bagaimana, berapa harganya, bagaimana tingkat produktivitasnya. Karena ini soal-soal ini banyak kita jumpai dan tidak bisa dijawab melalui kebijakan. Termasuk di dalamnya pasar terhadap sarana produksi pertanian maupun penyedia jasa input itu oleh industri. Jadi ada ketergantungan Indonesia itu masuk dalam food trap ya, jebakan terhadap pangan baik impor untuk kebutuhan pangan untuk rakyat Indonesia maupun sarana produksi pertanian itu. Demikian
Ada 2
juga
menit lagi, Pak.
ya. Itu juga bagaimana kita akan melihat di pasar pangannya itu. Berapa harga yang diterima oleh petani. Dengan demikian, beberapa pertanyaan yang menjadi kunci itu, berapa banyak yang dibutuhkan untuk mendukung itu, berapa yang kebutuhan di tingkat lokal, berapa yang bisa dibeli, ya, berapa cadangan pangan yang bisa disediakan. Kalau kita lihat cadangan beras pemerintah akan selalu berkurang, 30 juta hektar akan selalu mengakibatkan berkurangnya karena kendala-kendala sebagaimana yang tadi saya sebutkan. Termasuk di dalamnya kelembagaan keuangan, baik oleh koperasi pertanian maupun bank. Lanjut. Next. Ini praktek yang sudah kami lakukan, baik secara praktek, ide maupun kebijakan. Jadi regulasi terkait dengan produksi, distribusi, dan konsumsi ini memang harus dikontrol di tingkat komunitas. Komunitas memungkinkan itu bisa mengontrol baik dari sisi harga, baik beras maupun gabahnya. Karena kebijakan di nasional terhadap HPP itu, kita masih ke HPP beras, HPP harga tunggal ya, padahal kita sudah mendorong adanya fleksibilitas untuk konteks agroekologi itu, bahwa pemerintah juga menyerap terhadap harga beras premium maupun beras organik. Termasuk di dalamnya itu komunitas itu harus dipahamkan terhadap situasi pada aspek isu-isu di produksi, distribusi, dan konsumsi. Termasuk di dalamnya adalah praktek baik terhadap sistem tanam padi. Kita pakai pendekatan sistem of rice intensification maupun sustainability rice platform untuk menjawab pertanyaan agroekologi. Di Indonesia itu agroekologi itu mahal. Pemilik sertifikat organik itu siapa? Apakah koperasi tani atau perusahaan? Ini yang mesti harus dituntaskan untuk konteks lokal maupun nasionalnya. Termasuk di dalamnya untuk mengembangkan platform pemuliaan benih yang dikembangkan oleh komunitas. Dan terakhir adalah mengembangkan forum pangan, bagaimana di tingkat lokal maupun di tingkat kabupaten itu, beras itu memang dinikmati oleh wilayah setempat. Jangan sampai distribusi beras itu, suatu daerah tidak mengkonsumsi beras yang dihasilkan dari tanah itu sendiri. Saya pikir itu merupakan elemen-elemen pengembangan dari apa yang kita sebut dengan kedaulatan pangan dan pendekatan agroekologi. Meskipun isu-isu agroekologi itu perlu kita perbincangkan, terutama di sertifikat holdernya atau pemilik sertifikatnya. Pengalaman kami di organik kayu manis itu, kita posisi tawarnya lemah karena off-takernya masih berkeinginan untuk menguasai sertifikat organiknya. Untuk yang di beras, karena kita kuat, didukung oleh pemerintah, sertifikat organiknya dipegang oleh koperasi tani atau kelompok tani. Mungkin itu yang bisa kami sampaikan untuk pembelajaran lapangan dari Indonesia untuk konteks lokal ya, dari yang tadi yang disebutkan oleh Ibu Chee, Ling maupun Pak Mane maupun Ibu Ching itu dari konteks global, saya menceritakan dari konteks lokal inisiasi yang dijalankan oleh organisasi tani menghadapi situasi-situasi perubahan iklim, pasar yang bergejolak, termasuk adalah gizi masyarakat untuk pemenuhan kalori dari kebutuhan petani. Terima kasih.
Ya, terima kasih Bapak Muhammad Nurudin. Isunya saya rasa sama di Malaysia dan juga di Indonesia. Beras ataupun nasi ini, padi ini adalah makanan utama dan seringkali menjadi satu isu yang sensitif kepada pemerintah. Dan permasalahannya adalah apabila kita ingin membawa satu sistem yang baru yang berbeza dengan sistem yang konvensional, ianya selalu mendapat penentangan daripada pihak yang selama ini telah memonopoli industri padi dan beras di negara kita ini. Thanks again, Mr. Muhammad Nurudin, for your explanation on the situation. The situation in Indonesia.
You're welcome.
So without further delay, I would like to invite Xin Song from Farmer Seeds Network China to share the situation in China on agroecology and also what really happens in China actually. The floor is yours.
Good evening. Yeah, good evening, everyone. And I know for a lot of others, it's morning in the morning. Yeah, it's early morning. So we totally agree that the food system transformation calls for our conceptual and practical change to value the biodiversity-friendly farming system, a more holistic approach. So Farmer Seed Network, we have long been engaged in facilitating collaboration among farming communities, scientific communities, and social organizations and local governments to promote integrated solutions through community-based joint innovations. Like what Ching mentioned before, we majorly use the participatory plant breeding and participatory varietal selection as our main working methods in the past 20 years. For the past 5 years, we start to establish community seed banks, and we try to pilot farmer seed enterprise to support in situ conservation of agrobiodiversity and increase the resilience of local agroecosystems. And now we start to get an increased demand of our farmer field school and participatory plant breeding from local communities. So in 2019, we developed a training course and an exchange platform for smallholder seed systems and agrobiodiversity sustainable management, and with technical support from public research institutes and social organizations. When we look at today's agenda, we realize we have to tell that what we have to do now to respond to this long food movement. So for Farmer Seed Network, we have been conducting participatory action research to promote and document successful practices in biodiversity conservation and utilization at local communities. So we explore and advocate the development of city region food systems. For the past 2 years, the outbreak of COVID pandemic tells us that disaster create regional isolation, and eat locally, consume locally is a good way to respond to disasters like this. And also, in order to respond to the local communities who practice agroecology, we collaborate with other social organizations to deliver food education to urban consumers. Well, because regardless, agribusiness always invests a lot of money to do commercial campaigns. They always put a lot of money to use pop stars to be their spokesperson and tell them to buy more industrialized products. So on the other hand, we need to tell local food stories and to promote from seed to table initiatives. And this is what we are doing right now. Also, we collaborate with community schools to provide food education for school kids, because by 2045, the school kids now will be in their 30s, and they will be the ones to continue the next long food movement. And also, we have been connecting with our international partners and try to build a joint up cross-border platform that includes governments, enterprises, scientific research institutions, social organizations, and rural and urban communities to promote multi-stakeholder groups to jointly carry out exchanges and cooperation in sustainable biodiversity and traditional knowledge conservation and utilization. And actually today I have quite a few colleagues also in this meeting. So I'm going to wrap up here, and during the discussion, we'll contribute more. Thank you, Amir. The floor is back to yours.
Yeah, thank you, Xin Song. So many activities is running at China. Yeah, it's good to know. Now is the discussion time. So anyone who have any questions or any comments, you can raise your hands to speak, or you can use the chat room to ask questions. Yeah, Ching.
Yeah, if I may, Amir, I just wanted to thank our partners in the region from Malaysia, Indonesia, and China, because they've shared very important local contexts. And I really believe that to build a long food movement, we have to build from the ground up, right? Because our farmers we know are the ones at the forefront of the struggle. Many of our organizations work with smallholder farmers. And I think there are, and I know from the work, for example, from API or from the FKMM members and also from FSN China that I'm aware of, they have done so much in terms of doing many of the actions that Pat has already talked about. And perhaps one take-home message we can have is how do we connect as different groups in this region to further share that information with each other so that we can build. For example, we know that FSN has a lot of experience in participatory plant breeding and PVS, also with community-supported agriculture. I remember going to the restaurant in, where we have the farmers supplying directly to the restaurants, agroecological and organic food. And these are ideas that we can take up in our own countries as well. So I just wanted to encourage that we should see this meeting as just a beginning, because I know we are close to time up actually. But then hopefully that we can connect with each other and share these experiences so that we can actually build this change that we all want for our food systems here. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Ching. Yeah, correct. We should see this meeting as the beginning. So there are a lot more things for us to do in the coming years, especially post-COVID. Every country is speaking about food security, but which way? I mean, which food security initiative that each country want to take is a different issues. Yeah, that is the one that we need to promote. We need to advocate. So that's our way of doing things. Will be taken by the governments and will be the mainstream's initiative promoted by the government to the farmers. I will wait a few more minutes if anyone wants to speak before we conclude.
Could I just add something to what Ching said?
Yeah.
Just very quickly. And I found the presentations really quite exciting and very encouraging that so much is going on and so well grounded in the realities of your own conditions there. I would want to just stress the point that the need for sharing, because we're going to be facing in every part of the world pests and diseases affecting our crops and our livestock that we've never experienced before as climate changes, as biodiversity disappears. That's going to happen to us. So we don't know what kinds of seeds of what kinds of species we're going to require perhaps in 10 or 15 or 20 years, not even 25 years from now. So the need to have that cross-fertilization, sharing of experiences, ability to exchange both the practical experiences and even exchange the seeds, I think is going to be absolutely critical in the decades ahead.
Yeah. Correct. I agree. Jika ada sesiapa yang ingin bertanya soalan ataupun ada pandangan yang ingin diketengahkan, boleh angkat tangan melalui butang reaksi. All right, I think we are at the end of our sessions for tonight. I would like to thank all the speakers. I will thank Pat Mooney for the introduction of the reports. I'm not reading the report yet, but I will, and I think everyone should, because this is actually a very important issues. We now live in very confused times at the moment, with a lot of issues, lot of conflicts, lot of issues to face, and let not be the food issues is the next issues that we will face if we're not doing something to avoid the issues, because we can see where our world is going on in the next few hours, in next few years, in the next maybe 10 or 20 years. The climate change is inevitable, and how we should react to that is depend on ourselves, on our movement to advocate and to tell our government to take appropriate actions towards agroecology and natural farmings and organic agriculture and all sort of the same thing, the alternative things rather than the usual economic of scales, modern technologies, and we have heard that so many years, and what it's bring is only benefiting some of us, and actually the farmers is actually suffering because of this. The new technologies have been introduced, or new system that's been introduced actually makes the ecosystem worse. Thank you very much. But last but not least, let's take some pictures together. So I hope we can, you can put on your cameras. Okay. Boleh buka kamera, kita akan tangkap gambar sama-sama sebagai kenang-kenangan sebelum kita habiskan sesi kita pada malam ini. Alright, semua nampak serius ni. Mungkin kita boleh senyum Alright, I will print screens now.
Thank you very much.
All right, the next page. Terima kasih, selamat malam. Thank you very much. See you again. And I think we have been talking more than 1 hour. Yeah? Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Terima kasih, Amir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. Yeah.
Everyone, bye-bye, good night.
Good morning.
Good morning.